Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. As online harms facing children continue to grow, experts are meeting this week at the 2025 ASEAN ICT Forum on Child Online Protection to push for smarter, evidence-based safeguards. Tonight on the show, we'll ask, what does real child safety online look like and what should guide policy making in this area? Well, joining me on the show to help us think this through is Dr. Chiu Han Yi, who is Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in NUS, where he leads the Governance and Economy cluster. His work focuses on online harms, digital trust, and technology adoption. Han, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. If I may begin with some relevant news or news that's happening quite timely, is that in December we have Australia enforcing a world first law banning children under the age of 16 from having accounts on major social media platforms. I'm wondering, Han, what this signals to you in terms of how countries are responding to child safety online and how they're thinking about platform responsibility.
Melisa, thanks for having me. I thought I would do a quick intervention on that, the use of bans, because we've heard it so much in the past couple of years when Australia was talking about age restrictions for social media. And today when we heard the e-safety commissioner talk about it, it's actually a age assurance and minimum age. So we don't use language like bans and assurance. And I think that signals how countries are tackling the issue and looking at the issue instead of going very hard line on bans and age restrictions. They are talking about, so Australia is talking about a minimum age. So the use of language is important here. It's a minimum age requirement rather than a ban. So with that in mind, how are countries thinking about it? I think there is a growing momentum in the region to think about age restrictions and minimum age requirements. And I spoke about it at the forum this week, that when we think about new technology that we adults don't understand, right? There is this phenomenon in media research called moral panic. And with every wave of technology, the adults in society will think of reacting. They need to react to the moral panic. By the way, I shared in 1920s, the moral panic was about crossword puzzles, because women were not going to get any housework done because of crossword puzzles. And then in the 1930s, it was movies. And then what else? We have video games. And then in the 1970s, it was rock and roll. So we need to recognize the impulse, the instinct to want to ban the new media that adults don't understand. So that, I think, was what I addressed. And then to what the policymakers are thinking about, I would like to implore all the stakeholders to think about what the actual scientific evidence is showing us. I think when different countries or policymakers think about banning and restrictions, it is responding to the actual anxieties, and very understandable anxieties, from parents, the well-meaning adults in society who think that their children are being harmed. I think these are well-meaning intentions, but what does the scientific evidence say? Right? The scientific evidence is saying that in general, across all the studies, that the moderate use has positive and small impact on young people's lives. It is only when there are egregious harms such as child sexual exploitation that we need to respond more strongly. So I think the responses that we're thinking about also need to be calibrated to the harms that we are considering.
Yeah. I mean, and thank you so much for bringing up that point of moral panic, because I do feel that sometimes, the governments and even the public feel pressured to respond quickly, or they want a quick response, a almost reactive response, especially when online harm to children makes the headlines, right? So when we think about how we have to ground ourselves in an evidence-based response, talk to me a little bit about what children lose or what they risk to lose when our reactions are that reactive, when regulations and policy and the safeguards we want to put in place are almost overly broadly punitive measures, if I may use that phrase. How do we think this through?
Yeah, I wanna first respond to where I think we can be punitive, right? I think at the conference, at the forum, we've heard from many stakeholders and attendees that child protection is top of mind. Mm-hmm. And certainly when we think of protecting children, the most egregious kinds of harms are child sexual exploitation and abuse. And if we can agree, then the bans are probably not the most effective solution to reduce the child sexual or exploitation material or acts, right? What we can do is look at all our legislation and see which ones do we need to update, which ones can we make more punitive to signal that we are serious about taking the perpetrators of these online harms to task. We need to update our existing legislation that says, if you think that you can use synthetic material to skirt the laws, no. Child sexual exploitation and abuse also includes image-based sexual abuse. Deepfakes and Gen AI materials are all out of bounds. And then I think it's where legislation or legislators can send a very strong signal that these acts are wrong, and we protect the children from the perpetrators who are, for me personally, doing the most egregious act of robbing the children of their innocence. Right. So and now can you run me your
the second half of that question was, how important is it that we don't become overly broadly punitive? What do our children risk if we design online child protection frameworks that are too broad, too reactive?
Yeah, thank you for that. I get very passionate when I talk about appropriate response, and I think we've heard quite a lot from the wonderful folks at the Child Rights Coalition, and they've done research, and I am definitely a proponent of evidence-based position and policy making. So they have come up with a very strong research. They ask young people. And I think that's the conversation that we're not having enough of, asking the young people. And if you speak to the young people in our region, they need the space to create, to connect with people. Even at 12 years old or 13 years old, from different contexts, different countries, right? I'm not saying that it should be allowed or it's okay for everybody. But if you hear the stories of the young people, they are connecting online. They are finding, more importantly, they are finding support where they cannot find offline. We've heard stories of how a young artist cannot find people who appreciate the artist for who they are in real life, but online they find support. They find, the sponsors for their art, and they find a community. And if we legislate with these blunt tools, we take away those opportunities for them to learn. We take away the opportunities for them to relate to other young people. So we take away the positives as well as the possible negatives.
All right. So in the minutes that we have left, I want to ask you, based on the Australia example. So looking at what we can draw from Australia's move, you talked a little bit just now, you mentioned that it has to be applied in different countries, different contexts. So when you think about that, the fundamental contextual differences, are there lessons still to be drawn from Australia's move in December?
I think there is a place for communicating. There is a minimum age for using parts for different digital activities. And again, I return to the research, right? If you listen to the pedagogical researchers, the child psychologists, we know it's clearly if the child is too young, like below 2 years old, it's best not to expose them to too much screen time. None, if you can avoid it. So, because it does hamper the development of their neural pathways. Physical activities, social activities are more formative at that age. And then at 2 or 6, they are still developing. So you expose them to different digital activities slowly and have a conversation, right? I told that story of how Andrew Zabilski, so he is Professor Andrew Zabilski, he gives his children mobile phones at 3 years old. And then I was like, gobsmacked, like, he does? This is a professor of technology giving his children mobile phones at 3 years old. But there's a caveat. When he gives them the mobile phones at 3 years old, he only allows for the features of viewing photos. So they get the device, but they also get to view photos. It's like, leafing through a photo album in real life. And then slowly he adds the features of taking pictures and making calls. But each feature that he adds comes with a conversation. And it's scaffolding the child's ability and the developmental stage. I think that is the lesson that this phrase came out quite a lot in the forum, which is age-appropriate measures. And for me, Professor Zabilski really embodies that, right? And he knows that, okay, at this age, this is what I shouldn't do. At this age, this is what we can help scaffold the young people into the digital world that they are going to be living, working, and learning in.
I love that. That's a great story. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Dr. Chiu Han there from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at NUS. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this. We'll be back with more on this topic, so stay tuned. We'll be back. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. Let's continue our conversation about keeping children safe online amid rising digital risks to our children. Now, among those calling for more effective, more child-centered responses to this is Saskia Blume, who is Chief of Child Protection at UNICEF Malaysia. She joins me from the sidelines of the 2025 ASEAN ICT Forum on Child Online Protection. Saskia, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's start with really understanding what urgent online risks children are facing today. I mean, the world is such a different place now, and earlier Han mentioned the risk of synthetic risks. So talk to me a little bit about that, about where you see the most urgent online risks facing our children today.
Sure. And first of all, thank you so much for having me again, Melissa. It's a pleasure to be here. I think it's important to make the point that children are facing a lot of new risks linked to being online, but also some of the risks they're facing are not necessarily new. And that will be important when we consider what kind of responses we need to keep children safe online and offline. So in terms of online, we know that 1 in 25 children in Malaysia have experienced online sexual abuse or exploitation. So that could be sextortion or having your sexual image shared without your consent. 1 in 25 is more than 1 in every classroom, right? And then we know that AI-generated child sexual abuse images are exploding. So last year, we had 7,000 images being reported globally, right, over the whole of 2024. And now in the first 6 months of 2025, we have over 440,000 images. So it's developing really rapidly. And at the same time, children also have been facing risk offline, as long as we can think, right? And again, looking at Malaysia, 1 in 7 adult women, 1 in 7 adult men in Malaysia have experienced sexual violence in their childhood. And so it's important to keep that in mind, because we're moving along the online, offline continuum of, for children, it doesn't matter, is it online or offline? They don't make such a distinction. It's their life that is affected, and we need to equip them to be safe online and offline.
Right. Saskia, you mentioned that some of these threats or some of these risks are not new, but are there still protection gaps that that UNICEF is concerned about in terms of addressing some of these risks?
Definitely. I mean, I think the first really concerning insight that we have is that half of the children that have experienced online exploitation and abuse have not revealed this to anyone, right? There was no one trusted in their life that they confided in to seek help. And also, when we know that 1 in 7 adult women, 1 in 9 adult men have experienced sexual violence before the dawn of the internet, the majority of them have also not confided in anyone. So how do we create a space? How do we create outlets? How do we create reporting lines that are trusted by young people, so they can seek help when needed, and ideally before things escalate? When they already start having a strange feeling about someone or something they see online, how can they escalate this and seek help before things get worse?
Okay, but when we think about having those measures or those guardrails or safeguards, how do we think about reconciling those protections with children's rights to digital participation, digital expression, digital learning, living some part of their lives online? And I do wonder where you might see the trade-offs in that. Are we being too reactive in our, and this is the term Han used earlier, in our moral panic to address the issue?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think it's important to say that there shouldn't be a trade-off between rights, right? When we look at the Convention on the Rights of the Child, where Malaysia is also, one signatory, and it's the most widely ratified human rights treaty in the world, the right to be free from violence is a right, and we're very concerned about that. But so is the freedom of expression, the right to privacy, access to information. All of these rights are important to fulfill for children. And that's why it's important to equip children, families, to be able to navigate risk, whether they're online or offline. And at the same time, to also ensure that being online becomes a more safe experience. So how do we do that? By safety by design, right? Mm-hmm. So really building it into platforms, social media, apps, that we're thinking about how to keep children safe.
All right.
As they develop it. Yeah.
Tell me more about safety by design. I'm hearing so much about it lately, and it's increasingly used as a standard. What does that mean in terms of embedding protections at the platform level, at the product level, and not just reacting to harm when it's happened, unfortunately?
Sure. I think the default for many products is not to necessarily think about safety by design, right? Only if we know that it's specifically geared towards children. That's when safety by design kicks in more commonly, but also not always. And that's a huge issue, because 1 in 3 internet users globally is a child. So the default thinking should be, no matter what your intention is and no matter who you design your product for, children will see it, children will access it. And so safety by design, for example, can be quite simple. Can be, you have default privacy settings. You have very easy reporting channels, you know, on your site or within your app. It can also be a bit more complex responses, like hashtagging of known child sexual abuse materials. So this is something that is free to access for big companies. They can actually look at their websites and use the hashtags that automatically filters images that are uploaded for known child sexual abuse materials. So these are things that can be built into the development process, and if not, added on later, but ideally it should be from the get-go.
Right. You mentioned earlier a troubling statistic that so many children don't even tell anyone something concerning that has happened to them. When we think about safety by design, when we think about having those reporting channels, all of that means nothing if the child themselves doesn't know how to use it or doesn't trust to use it. So I know UNICEF has long championed the participation of children and adolescents in shaping policies that affect them. Talk to me a little bit about that. How can young people be meaningfully involved in the co-creation of digital safety solutions that affect them, that are meant to keep them safe?
Right. Yes. I mean, again, going back to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, children should be consulted in all decisions that affect them and in everything that touches their lives, right? And I can maybe I give two very concrete examples of what that can look like in practice. So coming back to the issue that half of the children did not confide in anyone, what does that say about the reporting mechanisms that we have in place, right? They're not necessarily co-designed with young people. They're not in a language that children can understand. And they're not they're not using the channels that children would necessarily access, right? Australia is a good example for co-designing reporting channels with young people. So really looking how would you want to access help? What is the language you want to hear? How do you generate trust, right? What is an accessible way for you to access help, and what is your expectation of it? And so this is something that it's very straightforward. It's a consultation process. See what is the current mechanisms. How would you ideally like to see it? Designing it together so that we have less children suffering in silence and seeking help earlier. And another example is, as we're speaking here from the ASEAN ICT Forum on Child Online Protection, that has actually been co-designed with young people. So this starts from what are we talking about? What is on the agenda? From running sessions with young people, from having young people also on the sidelines meet decision makers. So that, from the get-go, and we had also young people on the steering committee to really discuss every step of the forum and what is being discussed and how we're discussing it.
Right. I love that. I love that they are part of the process every step of the way. So for our audience watching tonight who may be themselves either a young person or a parent of a young person or even a policymaker, what is it that you would like them to bear in mind when we think about the need to translate the discussions in those conference rooms, the commitments that we've made on paper? How do these all translate to safer online experiences for children? What would you like us to keep in mind, Saskia?
I think maybe three things. One is it's a shared accountability between everyone to keep children safe online and offline. I think to parents in particular, and also those that are in the lives of children and young people, to create a space where young people feel confident in confiding in you. Seek out conversations, be curious about your children's online behavior, and discuss, how to stay safe online as well. And then thirdly, it's really around how do we increase safety by design, also with local industry in Malaysia, many of whom who are here as well and who are very interested. And so we'd love to continue that conversation with them as well.
Right. Saskia, thank you so much for joining us on the show. I hope you have a wonderful conference ahead. Thank you for taking time to speak with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Melisa.
That was Saskia Blume, Chief of Child Protection at UNICEF Malaysia. And that wraps up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.